How do you feel the British perceive Americans?
I feel like there's quite a lot of, I hate to say it, but mockery involved.
I think a lot of people think Americans are extreme.
Do you think that the British think that they're better than Americans?
I think some do, yeah.
There's a lot to make fun of, I think.
We're also fantastic at queuing as well. That's another great thing about us.
They're rubbing me the wrong way because they're too extra. It doesn't seem like it's genuine.
Today, I'm in London to get to the bottom of a very important question.
Why do the British look down on Americans? Well, this question has been posed to members of the British public by American YouTuber Nathaniel Drew when he recently visited London, England. Nathaniel is on a journey of self-discovery and self-improvement as he travels to different countries around the world.
For context, we are two Brits who have been living in the United States for a number of years and are married to American men.
For as long as I can remember, I have had the sense that the British look down on Americans. This is a generalization, and therefore doesn't apply to everyone, but it's a strong enough trend that I felt I needed to investigate this further. Here's a quote from Prince Harry's memoir, Spare, that perfectly captures the feeling that I have about this. With some, the anti-American sentiment ran very hot. I was reminded of my childhood, when people warned me all the time about Americans. Too loud, too rich, too happy, too confident, too direct, too honest. I'm very curious what people are going to have to say about this. I have a feeling I'm onto something, okay? So, having said that, let's start talking to some people. How do you feel perceived as Americans by the British here in London?
A big, stupid, bellowing oaf.
I think most of Prince Harry's observations are more positive than negative, to be honest. I think Brits as a whole are a bit jealous of America's wealth and their positivity.
Something you hear a lot is the comment that Americans are a bit extra, they're a bit too much, a bit too overpowering in your face. And I do think that that's a way Americans come across when they're outside of their own country sometimes.
It doesn't seem like they're that way so much in their own country, I don't think.
Not all of them, obviously,
No.
but you do tend to notice this more abroad, I think.
And the same with the Brits. I mean, look how some Brits react when they're abroad and behave.
Definitely.
So we're not always our best when we are a tourist, are we? Not always.
No, which is a shame because that's really when you're most powerfully representing your country, isn't it?
I have to admit, the inspiration to make this video came when I moved to Europe. As I've explored in previous videos on this channel, many Europeans have mixed to negative views of Americans as dumb and uncultured. But to my surprise, the same goes for the British. I've come to realize that the only people that see the British as intelligent and sophisticated are the Americans. Many Europeans, like the Portuguese or the Spanish, see a very different reality. The British that go off on holiday to get extremely drunk and break things. The British that are isolationist with Brexit. The British that don't learn foreign languages, that stick to their native tongue. Wait a second, I thought to myself. That's what Americans do. Other people do this as well?
How dare they copy us?
I kid, of course. Still, it does feel like the Brits act like the Americans of Europe, but I am certain that is not something that they'd like to hear said about them. I mean, no offense, I am American after all. Does that not prove my point though? No one wants to stoop to the level of Americans. I felt I had to get my answers directly from the source.
That is so true. Nobody loves the Brits the way the Americans do, and we love you for it.
Thank you.
Thank goodness somebody loves us, because when you go abroad, it's quite apparent that people from other countries are not so enamoured.
I've been in more than one country around Europe, and I kind of asked them what their perception of the British are and what Britain is. And they'd say, oh, Britain is little America.
That's fascinating.
And I don't think the British see it that way at all, but that is the perception of other countries.
I think because of our special relationship with America, we're always together, usually in political situations. We sort of speak the same language. There's very much a shared culture. And I think the Brits think that they've got more in common with American people than people just across the channel.
Another interesting thing I heard in Europe once, someone said, oh, America is Batman and Britain is Robin. It's like,
that's funny.
It's funny, but it's also kind of like, I don't want to be the Robin to America's Batman.
I think they are so much more powerful than us, and back in the day, they were our colony. Like,
It's kind of like this, oh, how the tables turn kind of thing.
And I think we like an underdog, and America is not an underdog in any shape or form. So again, that little bit of
Yeah,
jealousy.
I think another thing is Americans don't come across as particularly humble. They know when they're good at something. They have a great sense of their own self-worth and self-importance, which are great qualities, really.
Yeah.
But I think as Britain, we kind of value that more humbled, reserved kind of personality, which a lot of Americans, and definitely the stereotype of Americans, isn't.
So do you feel that generally, the big generalization, there's mockery towards the Americans and Americans towards the British is more like cute. We think you're cute.
Yeah, I would say that, yeah.
How do you feel about Americans thinking you're cute?
Well, it can be taken as a compliment, obviously, but if they think that we're, like, as a country, not really a force to be reckoned with, then just because we do all these, like, things that date back to long before the US was established, it's not really relevant that they can mock us for that.
Is it condescending, would you say?
A little bit.
Or ignorant?
More ignorant. It doesn't, like, hurt me.
Here's the thing that I think is going on here. We are not the same, the Brits and the Americans, but we sure have a lot of similarities. Compare us to the Japanese, or to Native Americans, or to Ethiopians, and the differences between Americans and the British seems relatively small. We're like blood siblings in the village that is the globe. So here's what all of this started to make me think of. There's a concept in psychoanalysis, I'm going to read you the definition, but it's called the narcissism of small differences. This comes from Freud. The narcissism of small differences is the idea that the more a relationship or community shares commonalities, the more likely the people in it are to engage in interpersonal feuds and mutual ridicule because of hypersensitivity to minor differences perceived in each other. We see this all over the world, between the Argentinians and the Chileans, for example, between the French and the Belgians. And indeed, I think this is what is happening between the Brits and the Americans. But at the end of the day, I feel like we make the little things that make us different much bigger than they really are.
That is a very good point, because you know, just things about, we really get hot under the collar the way Americans produce our English words and way they spell them differently.
Yeah.
And it's not really a big issue, but we take exception to it. So it's the small things that kind of, because we've got so much in common,
Yes.
it's those little things that we push out of all proportion.
It's tribalism, I suppose, in a
Yeah,
sense.
yeah,
It's kind of like
it
us versus them.
You're trying to make yourself look better and bigger and more important. In order to do that, you have to knock the other side. You sort of boost yourself by making fun at the other one.
Yeah, which isn't very nice, really.
It isn't, but obviously it's human nature, but it isn't very nice, no. And why we feel we have to do that, I don't know, but we do, don't we?
I think with America in particular, there's a feeling among some British people that we need to put them in their place. They're getting a bit too big for their boots.
Yeah.
And we just need to like bring them down a peg or two.
Yeah.
Get them back to their level. Kind of like you would do with an older and younger sibling. We're like the older sibling.
Yeah.
And now our little brothers got all big and tough and strong.
Yeah.
And we're like, we need to just remind him that we are the eldest and we are therefore superior.
Yeah.
America's seen as very alpha male, if you think about it in terms of masculine and feminine.
Yeah.
There's an alpha maleness to Americans. And maybe it's just the way they speak, the accent, but you don't really have that sense of Britain, I think.
I thought the last comment was interesting about perceiving Americans as the alpha male and perceiving the Brits as kind of this repressed individual.
I think we probably all seem repressed to Americans, you know, in the sense that we keep everything so bottled up and close to our hearts, and they're so much more like free and easy in the way they express themselves and their masculinity, I would say.
They're very sort of dynamic and positive and
kind of go-getters
and leaders.
This is obviously hugely generalised, but we don't tend to push ourselves forward in that way. I think a lot of British men, it's hard to speak for them, but I've never really heard any of them say that they wish they were more masculine or able to express their masculinity more, and that is something you hear in America. You hear that quite a lot, which is interesting because to us they seem incredibly masculine.
Yeah, they do. You get the image of the cowboy or the successful businessman, and I think people strive for success to be the best in America, whereas in the UK you're just glad you're okay, really.
Yeah, that's
You're
right.
getting on all right.
Yeah, perhaps it's kind of like drive for, you know, incredible success and wealth, maybe power requires a more masculine energy in a lot of cases, or perhaps people perceive that it does, and that can kind of make people feel like they're lacking if they don't feel like that's them at their pure core.
I mean, huge generalizations, as we said, but you know, there's a lot to be said for that, I think.
Yes.
There's definitely sort of a sense that there is a lot of difficult things going on in America, and that America potentially could be quite a difficult place to live, especially if you're of colour or from the Middle East. Considering we're like right on the edge of Europe, we have more in common with America in many ways than we do with the rest of Europe, which in theory is where we should be more aligned. And I think there's sort of something that can feel sort of slightly odd about that, you know, like with the whole Brexit thing, breaking away more from where we're most closely connected to and sort of being in a situation where, you know, we're going to end up with chlorinated chicken instead.
There's this tendency to think of Americans as just, you know, they're simplistic, really.
Are you like annoyed by the Americans here in
Sometimes.
I wouldn't say
Depends how they are.
Now the interesting thing is I love to drag the US through the mud and criticize it for all the things that I think it deserves criticism for, but the second the Brits start criticizing me or the US, you have nothing to say. Kind of like I can criticize where I grew up, but you aren't allowed to. And the British, in my opinion, are doing their version of the same thing, criticizing themselves to no end, but no one wants an outside opinion. Maybe we all do this. I think we all do this. It's like pointing at someone else's flooding house when your own house is on fire.
That is so true. You're allowed to criticize your own country yourself, but if anyone else criticizes it, oh my goodness, you take offense.
Yeah.
That is so true.
And it's a shame really, because an outside perspective can sometimes be exactly what's needed. Perhaps we can learn from each other rather than shutting each other down. Perhaps not, but it doesn't do any harm to listen, does it?
No, it's just you take umbrage as somebody else telling you what is wrong with your country.
You got the American dream, making yourself better and being seen to be self-improving, and it's a lot about earning money and being the best you can and going to the gym and all these kind of things.
Do you think that's, are you saying it's positive or negative?
I think it's a positive thing for Americans, but I think the way it's perceived is often everyone goes, oh, get out of my face, you know, because they probably, no one likes to enjoy someone else's success, at least in England anyway. I think in America it's probably very different. Oh great, you got a promotion. You know,
I do think one actually really lovely thing about being in America is everyone wants to celebrate your success with you.
Yeah.
At least, you know, it appears that way. Maybe they say different things behind your back.
They seem genuinely excited for you, which is lovely, isn't it? Because I don't tell anyone if I have a success normally. I kind of think, oh, you know, because they'll be like a bit smarmy about it or say, oh, good for you, but then thinking,
yeah. Well, I think this goes back to the thing I was saying about being humble. In the UK, you're kind of taught not to brag about your success, that tallest blade of grass gets cut kind of thing.
Yeah.
You're meant to kind of play down your success, which isn't true in America, I don't think. It's perfectly fine to share when things are going well for you. I still find that awkward even now, but I think that's another lovely thing about America is people know their self-worth and they're happy to share it, and I don't think it's bragging.
I just think they like to celebrate it and they've worked hard for it.
They're just happy.
And they're happy and want to share their happiness with other people.
Yeah.
Let's flip the question. How are Americans perceiving the British?
My answer to that is there is a power dynamic going on, and for better or for worse, the US is much more of a world superpower right now. So I don't think that the US feels threatened necessarily, like competitive with Great Britain. Because of that, I think there's kind of like they're cute, you know what I mean? Like they're Harry Potter and James Bond and sophisticated and, you know.
Use words like autumn.
Exactly. But I also think that there's also a major degree of ignorance. Like the US is so self-involved. We're not even paying attention to what's going on elsewhere in the world. So there's not even enough to form an opinion.
Yeah.
I think all in all, there's still a very strong bond between the UK and the USA. As I said before about the special relationship, that does create a kind of bond.
I think so. I think what's interesting about the special relationship, you hear that in Britain all the time. People will say things like, we have a special relationship with America. Those words specifically, special relationship, are used a lot.
Yes.
I've never once heard Americans say that they have a special relationship with Britain.
That is so true. No, I've never heard that from Americans.
No, from Americans living out here for 7
yeah.
years, no one has ever said America has a special relationship with Britain.
Okay.
So I don't know if that feeling isn't necessarily reciprocated in the same way, or whether Britain now perhaps becoming a more insignificant country than it has been in the past, kind of clinging on desperately to America, like, you know, give us relevance, give us how, you know, those kind of things. I don't know if it's that, but I don't think America feels the need to say that they have a special relationship with anyone, really. I think it's just America and then everyone else.
Yeah, America against the rest of the world.
It does feel that way. It's like, this is America and then there's like the world outside of it.
Yeah, well, even like the baseball is the World Series.
Yeah, and they don't invite anyone else to come play.
We'd love your opinions. Do the British look down on the Americans? What do the Americans think of the British? Do they think of them at all? But we would love to hear your thoughts. Please comment below.
Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, then please give us a like, maybe share with a friend, and hit subscribe to follow us on YouTube.